Welcome to The World This Week, or as we've renamed it this week, Ukraine This Week, because there's only one focus for this week's programme. Joining me to discuss Ukraine from all sides, we have in New York, Noor Ibrahim of the Daily Beast. Noor, thanks for being with us. Here in the studio, Manon Loiseau, reporter, director of the documentary film Belarus, An Ordinary Dictatorship. Thank you, Manon, for joining us. And joining us from Geneva, Elena Servitaz. She's the Geneva correspondent for the Russian radio station Ekko Moskvy, or Echo of Moscow. And I will remind you, once upon a time, she worked here in Paris with Radio France Internationale. Ekko Moskvy, of course, just been taken off air by the Russians. But Elena and her colleagues still working to make sure that the information gets out. Well, a week into this invasion of Ukraine, things aren't going to plan for Vladimir Putin. Nonetheless, there has been destruction and sadly much death. And now this alarm over the attack on and seizure of the largest nuclear power station, not just in Ukraine, but in Europe. Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, saying that this incident could have been 6 times the size of what happened at Chernobyl back in 1986. Let's take a listen to Vladimir Putin and have some of his words from this week.
We are a single people. We are a united, strong Russian people. And I will never give up on the conviction that Ukrainians and Russians are a single people. Many Ukrainians fell prey to the propaganda of ultra-nationalists in Banda and others who stood by Hitler in the Second World War. And our struggle against the neo-Nazis is taking place now during these hostilities.
The words earlier this week of Vladimir Putin, acknowledged by most to be complete nonsense, but basically that's the situation, and we're showing it for what it is. Let's bring it from New York, Noor Ibrahim of the Daily Beast. Noor, your reflection on this week, I mean, clearly what we've been seeing is absolutely horrific.
I mean, I think what we're seeing right now is Putin growing increasingly frustrated. Frustrated by the fact that this just hasn't been as easy as he thought it was going to be in terms of overtaking Kyiv. There's been, major issues in terms of fuel and food supply shortages. I don't think they expected the air defense from Ukraine to be as stellar as it has been. But the downside of that is that an increasingly frustrated Putin is an increasingly unhinged Putin. And I think that's, been evidenced by the latest incident at the nuclear facility. And I think that's what you need to watch out for, is that the more he faces these setbacks, the more he's, surprised by the stiff resistance that he's facing from the Ukrainians, the more aggressive and violent and, frankly, terrifying his tactics are going to be moving forward.
Indeed, Noor, today we've seen the shelling of Kyiv. We've seen the squeeze on Mariupol get worse and worse with people. I think the mayor is saying there's no more food left for people. It's a horrific situation. We'll come back to you in a moment, Noor. Let's bring in Manon here in the studio. This kind of tactic that we're seeing, it seems, as Noor was saying, Putin getting more and more desperate, looking more and more desperate in terms of what's happening on the ground. Do you see a pattern from other Russian conflicts emerging here?
Absolutely. I mean, I covered the war in Chechnya, and that's exactly what happened in Chechnya. He didn't expect a resistance at the beginning, and then he sent more and more troops and sent the aviation and just bombed everything, and Grozny was in rubble afterwards. And he's never cared about the human losses, ever. Yeah. So it's terrifying, and what's terrifying is now he seems completely locked into something which is irrational, where he's in a way taking revenge for something of 15 years of telling us about NATO and feeling we haven't listened, etc. And the more he sees the resistance, I think the further he's able to go. And that's terrifying. I spoke to lots of Russian friends, Ukrainian friends under the bombs, and all my Russian friends are trying to leave the country. All those who were resisting, and I think of Elena, I mean, at Ekko Moskvy, at Novaya Gazeta, which is still going on, but for how long, no one knows. They've always survived all the crises. Chechnya, Syria, when they were trying to tell the truth, Donbass, and they've been closed down and they all risk 15 years imprisonment because they used the war. They used the word war. You're not allowed. There's no war.
Special military operation.
Exactly, or pacification. So now you risk in Russia denazification. Yeah. So it's completely terrifying. As we're speaking at Memorial, which is the NGO that was created by Sakharov, that documents all the crimes of the Stalinian regime and the actual regime, there's an ongoing, FSB clampdown, and they're checking everything. And Memorial has been closed, so it's very, very troubled times ahead.
Indeed. Let's bring in, you were just referring to Elena. Elena Servatas, Geneva correspondent of the Russian radio station Ekko Moskvy, member of the Mikhail Khodorkovsky Anti-War Committee. Elena, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
I can't imagine what you're feeling right now, Elena. It must be a whole number of things going on in your head about what's happening, about the fact, there's a Russian side, obviously, you're seeing what's happening in Ukraine. You must be incredibly conflicted and really, I imagine, very angry.
Thank you for having me, Mark, tonight, because officially, despite of your presentation, officially I'm unemployed starting from tonight on, because they shut down Ekko Moskvy. Yesterday, our editor-in-chief gathered together and told us that despite of what's going on, despite of all the laws they prepared, we will still discuss and we will still work for our audience on social media, Facebook, YouTube, etc. As you know, tonight they shut down Facebook, and earlier today they shut down even YouTube for Ekko Moskvy. So the last guest on this station was Mikhail Khodorkovsky, which is symbolic, and there is no more Ekko Moskvy. There is nothing except official position. As you know, officially in Russia, there is no war in Ukraine. There is a special operation of deliberation. There is denazification. And when you think about it, it's not angry. When you are in France, when you grow up in France, and if it's the same if somebody would tell you that Simone Veil, for instance, was a Nazi, because Zelensky has his Jewish roots. His family was vanished in the concentration camps, and now Vladimir Putin is explaining to the whole world that he's the one who will fight against fascism and Nazis in Ukraine. And Manon was mentioning, Manon is really, I admire your courage in Chechnya, and the only thing I maybe will disagree, he's not angry with us on something about NATO. He was very clear from the day he came to power. You remember he said the worst collapse that could happen, the collapse of Soviet Union. It's a big disaster. It's a big strategy. Later on, he said that Russia has no borders and nobody paid attention to it. And in 2013, I was in Kremlin with François Hollande and Vladimir Putin, and I was clearly asking question to François Hollande, what about human rights in Russia? How would you react? Because human rights was already saying that it's the worst period for Russia in terms of human rights and violations. And what François Hollande he told, if there is something bad happened, we will speak about it. But it was already too late. It was already too late in 2014. And I was very surprised when they annexed Crimea. And I was very surprised that the French president, Emmanuel Macron, asked those two presidents, Sarkozy, who dealt with Georgia, and François Hollande, who dealt with Crimea, what we should do now. It's very upsetting, the reaction of West. But I will not blame only West. In this situation, there is three parts responsible: Russians, West, and Ukrainians. And somehow, one very famous politologist today told me a joke which was taught to the student in Moscow State University when I came from. And they say, if you take a husband, a wife, and a mistress and a lover, the one who will lose the control the first will lose everything. So in this situation, Vladimir Putin lost control first. So now we have to deal with what we have.
Indeed, and we have to see what happens next. Let's show the incident that sparked this emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. It's the incident of the attack on the power station, the biggest in Europe, in Ukraine, of course, now in the under the control of Russian forces. Zaporizhzhia, this could have provoked a nuclear emergency 6 times the size of the Chernobyl 1986 alert, according to President Vladimir Zelensky. Elsewhere, of course, reports that Kyiv's been bombarded today. Vladimir Putin telling the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, it's not the doing of Russian troops. They're not doing the shooting. And I wonder if anybody believes what Vladimir Putin is saying now. Nor Ibrahim, does anybody believe anything that Vladimir Putin is saying?
At this point, no. I mean, how can you? We have these phone calls with Macron and other people, you know, in the days leading up to the invasion, and he was blatantly lying, and everyone could tell. And now we're here. And I think at this point, you know, shame on us for believing a word that comes out of his mouth. And you know, this is just the beginning. It feels like it's been going on for a while, but this is what, like day 9 now. And I think that if, you know, we don't start learning from our lessons and, you know, kind of just disregarding anything that he says at this point, then we'll just be fooled again in a way that could be, you know, very devastating moving forward.
In terms of what the US can do, Noor, Joe Biden this week's been very adamant, very clear that there's no intention of going any further than what is being done already. That is moral support, money support, hardware support. No chance at all of a single US boot being put on the ground in the area.
You know, it's difficult. I feel like it's such a delicate balancing act, and that's precisely because everyone is realizing that you're essentially dealing with a madman here. You know, I think obviously the sanctions have been brutal, and I think that will definitely help in terms of at least you know, turning the Russian people against what's happening, and many of them already are, obviously, but it's difficult. It's difficult because you just don't know what will be, you know, the final straw that sends Putin over the edge, and I think that's the reason we've seen you know, these conversations about the no-fly zones and actually sending troops on the ground, because you never know if that's going to be the one thing that really sets him over the edge and you know, causes him to devastate Ukraine even further, and maybe not just Ukraine, but the whole world. So I think, you know, it makes sense, unfortunately, at this point, that the sanctions are all we can do, and I do think that that's a powerful tool, and you know, we'll see what comes of that.
Indeed, it is a powerful tool, and it is beginning to bite. Obviously, the ruble's collapsed. Putin himself is targeted. Many oligarchs and supporters of Putin, of course, are now feeling the bite as well, having their luxury yachts confiscated, that kind of thing. Zelensky, Manon, just to bring you on this one. Zelensky, his reaction after the attack and capture of the nuclear plant was that Europe has to wake up. Has there been a sense that Europe has kind of been sleepwalking into this whole crisis?
Well, definitely. I mean, I think we've just been blind at the nature of a regime of Putin ever since he came to power, ever since Chechnya, ever since the death of Anna Politkovskaya, of Boris Nemtsov, who's one of the leading figures, who actually, when he was killed, it was 2 days after he'd called for a demonstration against what the Russians were doing in Ukraine in 2014. Maidan, what he did in Syria, what he did in Donetsk. I mean, there's been a crisis, we managed to sort of sort it out, and then we move on and keep on doing business as usual. But the nature of a regime has always been that, and in a way, it's true he appears locked in something very frightening, but it's very also carefully planned. The way he's aggressing Ukraine and invading Ukraine, and at the same time destroying the civil society in Russia. It's a classic Soviet scheme, and it's been completely planned. That's what's and I'm afraid we're reacting very, very slowly. And the sanctions, of course, I don't know what effect they'll have. But for the moment in Russia, you have the friends I think that Elena and I have, the young people, the friends we have who have always believed in another Russia, who stay there. But the majority are watching the state news, which are saying that, for instance, what happened in Kharkiv, the bombardment was organized by the Ukrainians to make the West believe it was Russia. And they say that everything coming from us is fake news. And a majority of Russians believe that still today. The people, the thousands of people who went to demonstrate for Navalny. Now Navalny is going to have a second trial. No one is caring. So everything is being, brought to rubbles in Russia. About any children are being arrested because they bring flowers in front of the Ukrainian embassy in Moscow and just had that sign saying no war. Children from 5 to 11 with their parents. The parents risk losing the rights to their children. And that's how it's functioning. It is completely terrifying. And my Russian friends just say it's going to be like that for the next 15 or 20 years. The only language Putin understands is force. And I'm afraid the economic sanctions are coming late. What could happen is that the crisis with the ruble going down could bring people to the streets, but and maybe the thousands of Russian soldiers who are going to die, and what they call, when the corpses come back. But then the committee, sure. the committee, Komitet Soldatskiej Materi, is the committee of the mothers of the soldiers who've always tried to tell the truth of what was going to happen. Now they're under the threat of being a foreign agent. So maybe no one's going to know about it.
That is unbelievable.
It's unbelievable.
It's a horrible development, isn't it?
But they can close them tomorrow, because that's what exactly happened to Memorial and to Nowa Gazeta and to Ekko Moskvy and to Dost, and they're all closing. So that's exactly what can happen. And they were the link between the chief of the generals saying, we are the mothers, let us, go and fetch our sons, or let us bury our sons. And now they're risking to be closed down. And so we might never know how many soldiers are dying, Russian soldiers, and who didn't go there. The Russian soldiers didn't go there to attack Kyiv. They were told they were going to Donetsk. They're young soldiers. They've been confiscated their phones, so they don't know what's happening. They can't document. And they're, killing their brothers. It was something different in Chechnya because there was that whole propaganda, anti-Muslim propaganda. So it was, erasing Grozny was, they're all, future terrorists, etc. It's something completely different for a Russian soldier to kill a brother coming from Ukraine.
Manon, thank you very much indeed. Before I bring in Elena again, let's take a listen to Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky speaking a few moments ago.
We need to stop the Russian military immediately. You need to scream at your politicians. Ukraine has 15 nuclear reactors. If there's an explosion, it's the end of everything, the end of Europe. This is the evacuation of Europe. Only immediate action can stop Russian troops, prevent Europe from dying from a nuclear disaster.
Vladimir Zelensky, Ukraine's president, there with that urgent call, echoing words coming from the UN Security Council. Elena, can I bring you back in on this one? Article 56 of the Geneva Convention is what the UN Security Council is calling on Russia to respect, to make sure that, they should stop the war completely. But if they're going to continue, to make sure they do not attack a nuclear facility. Can we trust them?
I will, speaking about the sanction also, because now there is a law. Every Russian citizen who speaks about sanction or call for sanction, he's risking up till 15 years of prison. And, all members of Russian opposition were saying that it's way too late. It's way too late to ask for sanction. But there is some things we could eventually do. We were mentioning this closing the sky under Ukraine, full financial and not just partly isolation. And of course, we are, as a member of anti-war committee of Michael Khodorkovsky, we are asking for these humanitarian corridors for victims and for civilian, and to bring and for supplies. You know, in Switzerland we have a company which calls Trafigura, which has an access to discount Russian oil, and today nobody wants to buy Russian gas and non-Russian oil, even with discounted price, because of what's going on, because of this attack that Russia takes in Ukraine, this nuclear plant after shelling. It's something that no European normal person can imagine that how can it be. And Manon definitely was right by saying that we are dealing with a very mad and sick man. And even let's imagine we close the sky under Ukraine. What his step going to be next? So it's a very tough situation. I would never be able to I would like to be on a place of Emmanuel Macron and to take the decision he's about to take. And also, this isolation can drive Putin crazy. But it's not started today. As Manon mentioned, when they closed NGOs, Memorial, all these foreign agents, but don't forget about poisoning Alexei Navalny. All this Russian opposition was vanished. A lot of people flew out of Russia before today's situation in Ukraine. So after he vanished all this, he felt completely free, unpunished, and ready to go.
Elena, thank you very much indeed. Manon, I don't know whether you want to come back on what Elena was saying. I was fixing to ask you about whether you think there was word from Belarus that they didn't take part in any military action. I wonder whether that is something we can believe as well, or can we just dismiss that as
definitely not
more false statement? Yeah,
definitely not.
Yeah.
I mean, I made a film in Belarus 2 years ago. We spent 2 years filming clandestine, and all the people we filmed have been imprisoned this summer. All of them. What Putin is doing today, Lukashenko achieved doing it last summer. And when we were there were already military parades, joint military parades with Russians. And the Russian bases have been created 2 years ago with soldiers. So it's like, we're discovering all that. But all that was completely Britain. It's, no, of course... and
again, more evidence that Europe has kind of been sleepwalking into this whole thing. Because all the evidence has been there to read and, and to look at. And to your documentary, your report, it's all been there, hasn't it?
And it's not
a secret.
We've all been writing about it, filming. Yeah. We've all been trying to raise awareness. Alas, it hasn't worked. I think there's something of a fear also, and not knowing how to approach Putin. But for me, it reminds me of the last days of Stalin, and what Stalin said, and it applies a lot. When a lot of films I made about Russia was about that, the poisoning, the killings. It's like "Нет человек, нет проблем." It means no man, no problem. And
it's chilling stuff
yes,
you come out with.
It's chilling,
chilling,
but it's been going on, and now we've come to the absolute horror of it.
Noor Ibrahim in New York, is there a sense perhaps where you are that what happened in Afghanistan, the way that was all, the way the whole withdrawal was handled or mishandled, it might have emboldened Putin in some way?
Sorry, Mark, I'm not hearing you properly.
Is there a sense, Noor, I'll put that to you again, is there a sense that the way the withdrawal by the US from Afghanistan was handled or mishandled, that may have actually led to an emboldening of Putin? I think the vagaries of live television have beset us on this one. We'll try to re-establish connections with Noor Ibrahim in New York. Can I put that question to you about the whole... Well, the whole mishandling of coming out of Afghanistan. Did this alert Putin to his opportunity? Did it say, this is a time we could move?
It's an interesting question, because that's what a lot of my Russian friends are saying. Why now? Usually there's an election, there's something, there's something that triggers that kind of Putin reaction. And a lot of my friends were saying, yes, it gave a sign, that America was pulling out, therefore weaker. And Europe, for him, is nothing. It's like seems, we don't seem to have any union. Well, now it's changing, but so for him there was a vacuum that he just filled in, and then he started gathering all those troops at the border since 6 months ago. So it was at the same timing as the pullout of the Americans. So maybe he did feel the road was open for. I think he thought it was going to be a kind of blitzkrieg. He was going to get rid of a puppet president who, for him, I mean, he doesn't understand the. How can a Democrat president, an ex-actor, can be the leader of a nation? And he thought he was going to get rid of him in 48 hours and get do whatever he wants to do in Ukraine and stall his puppet. So maybe those signs and the Americans leaving America, Americans leaving Afghanistan, and the weakness of Europe. Made him feel he could get away with it.
Let's talk a bit about the humanitarian crisis, which is developing very, very quickly. We know that in Mariupol, they're running out of food. Water's been cut off. All communication in terms of railways getting in and out, that's all been blown up. Kyiv may soon be under siege as well. Other towns struggling. But of course, 1 million people have left Ukraine over the past week. Most of them going into Poland, but other places across Europe. A humanitarian crisis then underway. The refugee issue is something that obviously we need to sort of think about a little bit. And Elena, can I bring you in on that one to sort of, what is your feeling about how Europe is responding to this crisis? I mean, some people are saying that it's being well handled. Others are saying that obviously this is something that's going to get bigger and bigger. It could go to as many as 4 million people, which is almost as big as the Syrian refugee crisis.
I am raising 5 kids at home. The youngest one is 1 year old, and the four previous one that I have were participating in prepare humanitarian packs for Ukrainians. They were my son, who will be 16 years old, was working and to put everything in truck that now will have a corridor and to bring this into Ukraine. My girl, who is 13, he wrote a letter to all our neighbors for them to be, to ask them to participate. And all my friends in Geneva has this strong feeling. In Switzerland, people are very curious to the rest of very let's say unusual, because they can imagine they are queuing during the year to make some volunteer job. They are very close to this kind of action, and so there's a lot of Switzerland, Swiss, French, Italian, all people that in the national city are participating to save Ukrainians outside and inside the country. The second part of this question is very, interesting and difficult at the same time, because Europe already had a lot of refugees. It's been like 5 or 6 years ago with Syria. Not so long ago we had Afghanistan under the regime of Taliban's, and nobody knows exactly if Europe is really ready to have all these new waves of refugees here on their ground. I hope yes. I hope that it will not give the chance to far-right candidates now in France to have a larger audience and a larger percentage. But yes, it will be a real problem. And so it's what Russian authorities were threatening Europe with all these refugees to welcome.
Indeed, one of those issues, Elena, I think you kind of nearly hinted at it there as well, is that there's been an element of racism apparently on some of the borders. Manon, can I bring you in on that one? About, we've picked up reports, other media have picked up reports, people that we've spoken to who've come through have seen people who aren't white basically been given a really hard time trying to get through the border between Ukraine and Poland. Is this just a very, very sad and tragic factor of our lives that this continues to go on?
Well, it seems to be.
Yeah.
And it's in a way, sadly, not... I was surprised when I heard that, because it's there's a clearly anti-migrant feeling in Europe, and a lot in Poland, in Hungary, but also, here in France, everywhere. And, Yeah, it's sad. We haven't seen. It's amazing the solidarity that's happening now for the Ukrainians, and it's wonderful. Some refugees, some Syrian or Afghan refugees, haven't had that kind of solidarity. In a way, I guess it's also because Ukraine does, for people, it's Europe, and for all those at the borders of all those countries, which are ex-Eastern Europe, they feel it could happen to them tomorrow. So I think that thing about, we welcome you as brothers, and we'll get, how long it's going to last, no one knows. But I mean, to see Viktor Orban go to the border, and this is considering his absolute racism and his stances against. I mean, I've been filming there in Hungary, where they keep the migrants coming from the Greek islands are just horrifying, and the way suddenly he's welcoming the Ukrainians. I mean, let's hope there's going to be some action and control so that it doesn't happen anymore at the borders now. Some refugees are better than others. That doesn't work.
Yeah, indeed. Everyone's in need. That's the thing, isn't it? Let's take a listen to some of the refugees speaking as they came through the border.
Нет, я вчера отправил свою семью, а сам возвращаюсь в свой город Днепр. Жду, меня должны забрать и отвезти туда, на восток. А семья переезжает сейчас в Молдове, потом поедет в Румынию и дальше в Германию с целью получить статус беженца.
One refugee's voice there, and the story reflected in many others. Let's show you an idea of where the people are going as they're coming through. It's something like 1.2 million people, according to the United Nations. The majority going over the first location would be Poland, but you see the spread across Europe there, and this is set to go further and further. I think Boris Johnson of the UK saying they'd take 200,000 Ukrainians and waiving any restrictions that may or may not exist. Lots of words, lots of good words, and I think, as you were saying, Manon, lots of solidarity across Europe. Let's bring back in Noor Ibrahim of the Daily Beast, who is in New York. Noor, I hope we can hear you. I hope you can hear us. It's great to get you back into the discussion.
Yes,
you're there. That's fantastic.
Now.
We're talking refugees. We're talking the humanitarian catastrophe that is brewing here in Europe because of this crisis. And clearly there is some kind of a humanitarian corridor idea which has been kind of accepted in the second round of talks between the Russians and the Ukrainians on the Belarus border. WHO aid to come through that corridor. It's badly needed in places like Mariupol. We know that for a fact. We're hearing from our correspondents. Other places too really need these supplies quickly. How essential is it that this is done? How essential is it this is done quickly?
I mean, it's the most important thing right now. I think that it's one of the few bright spots that there was this agreement. How long that will last, how well it will be respected by Russia and Putin, I can't say. Again, it's week one, and we don't know how low he's willing to stoop. But just back to the refugee conversation that we were having, I think that it's fantastic that Poland and other neighboring countries are welcoming these refugees with open arms. But I also think it's really important to keep in mind that not too long ago you had all these Middle Eastern refugees that were being weaponized by Lukashenko and being, forced through the Polish border. And I think it really is an opportunity to just sit and recognize how they were treated. Many were left to just freeze to death out on a forest. And the fact is that this isn't surprising to me. The reports of racism at the border and foreign students from Africa and other places having to deal with what they dealt with. Again, I'm so glad that there has been such a good and open response to the Ukrainian refugees. But let's not forget to put that in context the next time there is another migrant crisis like that.
Noor, thank you very much indeed. Elena, can I go to you? We're looking to wrap up the programme now. We're out of time, but I'm going to infringe on my producer's words and take the time that we need to answer this question because it's important. But you haven't got much time. What are your solutions? How do we get out of this crisis? Is there one thing that needs to happen?
I didn't get Mark. What do you mean?
Is there, if you were the diplomat, what would you be calling for now? If you could get the ear of Vladimir Putin, what would you say? If you could stand there in the UN and say this needs to happen, what would you say?
Mark, when you ask me if you're a diplomat and you have to solve the problem, I would rather suicide. Really, I have no solution. The only scenario I see is a worst case scenario. I don't know what to say, what don't want to do. But the ambassador of Ukraine today told, by quoting Einstein, I guess, that he was saying that it's not the crime was done not by the evil, but the worst evil is done by those.
It was the world won't be destroyed by evil, it's by people not doing something when they see evil, something along those lines.
Yeah, exactly. So now we are just watching what's going on, and no one has a solution. Really, it's I don't know what to say. I really don't know.
The main thing is, I think, Elena, you're doing your job, and that's probably the best thing you can possibly do by actually sort of stating what's happening and making sure people get a chance to see, hear, and understand what's going on. So, power to you. Final word from you, Manon, about any possible solutions. What would the one thing be that might? It's too large a question, isn't it?
It's too large a question. I just want to have a word to Elena and to all her colleagues from Ekko Moskvy, who I've known for 20 years and who've just done an amazing job and who are so brave. And I think we don't realize that voice of Russia, how much we're going to miss it. I mean, it brings tears to my eyes because it's just been their work and what did Novaya Gazeta are unique and dozhed. And this voice, I mean, it's muffled today, but we're not realizing what it's going to mean for us all, not just for Russians, just for all of us in the future.
Manon Vazo, reporter, documentary filmmaker, thank you very much indeed. Thank you to Elena Servetas, Geneva correspondent of Ekko Moskvy and member of the Mikhail Khodorkovsky Anti-War Committee. And thank you to Noor Ibrahim of the Daily Beast joining us there from New York. Thank you very much indeed. And thanks to you for watching too. You can see this again, of course, via our website. Do stay with us for all the latest on the crisis in Ukraine.